In our panel today, I'm pleased to be joined by David Phillips, Principal Architect, M&E Solutions Cloudian, Thomas Burns, CTO, Media and Entertainment at Dell Technologies, and Stephen Tallamy, CTO, EditShare. All of these companies feature in the store elements of the BAM content chain, and each one of these companies, I'm pleased to say, were shortlisted for our BAM award within this category. Welcome, everybody. So on to the first question. The store market remains very turbulent as prices continue to decrease and new vendors continue to emerge. How do you differentiate your company in such a marketplace?
We've always seen ourselves as a disruptor to the status quo by offering real alternatives to the pricing and business models of legacy vendors. As a software-defined storage vendor, we sell customers a persistent storage license for the amount of capacity that they purchase, which they can run on their choice of commodity hardware. We offer reasonable support costs that don't balloon after 3 years. So for the customer, what this means is that they can avoid the headaches and high cost of forklift upgrades and hardware vendor lock-in. In comparison to the many public cloud vendors offering storage as a service, there's no question that Cloudian can offer a lower total cost of ownership for large asset libraries that have long-term retention. I think of it as the difference of renting a storage locker in a large facility versus installing a shed in your backyard. It's always going to cost more to rent storage versus purchasing the same cubic volume.
It's been great to see that the prices of mid and low end SSDs, such as QLC technology, are starting to compete with spinning disks. And of course, NVMe, which is more than just a spindle type, but an entire ecosystem that uses the whole width of the PCIe bus bandwidth inside the motherboard and chipset. All those combinations are making it more than just, a dumb array with some flash in it, to being a kind of a whole ecosystem of moving data to the right tier at the right price at the right time. And as the prices fall, that kind of tiering that's normally the provenance of large enterprises becomes available to small 4-person video work groups.
Yeah, so EditShare is really focused on smart video production-oriented software, and so our clustered file system is really there to facilitate that whole high throughput, low latency sort of controlled access to storage. And I think where we're sort of trying to differentiate is by having a truly open platform with APIs around every function that we have, and that really helps us integrate into an end-to-end ecosystem. And then on top of our file system, we provide our integrated asset management solution Flow. So that helps simplify that storytelling process. And I think sort of having a software-based approach has allowed us to leverage those same functions in a range of different cloud environments, including things like AWS and Tencent Cloud. But it's also allowed us to work with new hardware partners, including we just recently announced a partnership with HPE. So I think what that's allowing our customers to do is take advantage of the ongoing price reductions of the raw storage and ensure that their system still has the capacity, the performance, and the security they need for video production workflows.
We have seen adoption of cloud focusing on collaborative workflows, but is the cost of moving content in and out of the cloud hindering adoption?
Well, I think the increasing adoption of cloud collaboration platforms, and I'm thinking of services here like Frame.io and Iconic, I think they're driven by a number of factors. One being that they offer just killer features for distributed teams, things like real-time comments and markers and real-time flow into NLE, editing timelines of those, comments and markups. So, there's no question that the adoption has really been driven by, the capabilities and functionality that these platforms offer. But I think, the other thing, of course, is that they're just really easy to get started with, like choose the number of, the size of your team, input your credit card, and away you go. That being said, they're largely designed for proxy-based workflows. And the provided storage capacities for the different pricing plans are typically in a couple of terabytes, right? So that's fine for short form projects, things like promos and adverts and things like that. But for long form projects, which might have high shooting ratios, you're really going to start to exceed those limits very quickly. And you're certainly not going to have enough space to store all of your camera originals, especially if they're like 4K rasters or greater, right? So what we see happening is really kind of like a hybrid approach, right? So ingesting your high-res footage to your on-prem object storage first for long-term preservation, and then generating and uploading proxies to provide viewing and collaboration for your distributed teams. So strangely enough, we've seen disk-based cloud storage not really dramatically decrease in price, in the past few years. What we've seen is public cloud vendors increasingly offer colder, colder levels of storage, typically tape-based solutions, like Glacier and Glacier Deep Archive, right? So the prices for that colder and colder levels of storage has come down as those services have been introduced. But for disk-based object storage, the prices have really held, and that's why on-prem object storage continues to be an attractive economic proposition. I think also one of the barriers to adopting cloud platforms continues to be bandwidth, really. So as an on-prem object storage provider, part of our premise is that there's a limited amount of infrastructure. There's a limited amount of fiber that you can install on the ground and the pace that you can get that fiber in the ground. But it is increasing, and countries across the globe are investing heavily in their digital and network infrastructure. So I think as bandwidth and especially as things like 5G really start to roll out and come into play, you're going to have more options for like conduits to get upload data into the cloud and also kind of view it and distribute it.
Certainly the cost of moving content in and out of any place, whether it be the public hyperscaler or another facility or another part in your globally collaborative production pipeline, those data management costs are much more important than the storage, the actual infrastructure cost. Data gravity says that we bring the applications to the media because it's financially ruinous to do it the other way around. But since there's no more, single point of facility bricks and mortar infrastructure, and everything has to be distributed, a really successful data management strategy will allow everybody to have access to a common archive, but start to get intelligent about what assets are migrated to the hot edge, where you need, high single stream throughput with low latency for applications from editorial to color correction, etc. And so our whole concept of what is edge and what is core has almost become inverted, where the core now is an object store, be that on-prem or part of the public hyperscaler. And the edge is any small work group that needs access to those, low latency, high throughput single streams of video.
I think the cloud provides a really tantalizing workflow. It provides that easy access, to remote creatives, and that's something we've all needed to adapt to since the very beginning of the pandemic. I think really the main costs of getting things into the cloud are actually more around time. It takes a long time to get things into the cloud. Most of the clouds don't charge an ingress fee as such, but it's just getting that content there in a timely fashion and having the local network infrastructure to get things into the cloud. But that says, I think, if you are going to be working remotely, there's always going to be some sort of cost of transporting that content around. So it's really just evaluating that total cost of ownership. And I think really the place where customers really rack up the unexpected costs is actually getting files back out of the cloud, because those egress charges can be quite high. And that's where, if you are able to create a workflow that's entirely in the cloud, then you can take advantage of just leaving the storage there, leaving all the files in there, and just egressing the finalized material. I mean, we believe in offering our customers the right solution for their workflow. Some really just need an entirely on-premise solution, and we can offer that. Some need a mix of on-premise and cloud, and some have gone all the way into the cloud. And so giving that flexibility as people move through this sort of transition is really where we think we can add some value.
Do you see this reported barrier diminishing in the near future? Or will on-premise storage continue to be a better economic and or operational proposition in some, or indeed many, applications?
We find that the primary barriers to wider adoption of object-based storage is typically scale and pace of operation, right? So how big is your asset library? Is it a petabyte or more? Do you have sufficient rack space in your data center or co-location facility? For geo distribution, do you have one or more data centers, that are sufficiently, spread apart geographically? Quite often it comes down to also how quickly an operation needs to archive and restore assets. If slow asset retrieval times raise the risk of lost revenue, as it often does in news and sports, then object storage, provides a clear return on investment. All that being said, we have customers of all shapes and sizes, and often the most helpful contribution we can make is to work with the customer to right-size their environment. Sometimes that's, a central repository for all of their assets, but in other cases, a hybrid solution makes more sense, where the most common or recently, acquired assets reside on disk-based storage, and then all the rest of their content library is on, some other format, be it data tape, either locally, or they have, used some sort of public cloud service that provides an off-site repository. And then another benefit that we can offer, customers that are trying to get into object storage is that we make it very easy to start small and then scale their cluster, adding, a node at a time, just as much capacity as they need, as they kind of really understand their growth patterns. So, all of that is to try to really kind of provide all the benefits of object storage, but really keep it cost competitive and makes as much financial sense as possible.
Users may see the inability to move large amounts of data into and out of the public cloud as a barrier. But I think we have to get over that. I think that the cloud is going to be here to stay because it's just so fantastically easy to disperse assets among people. It means that you're no longer restricted to geography for both your talent and your tools. Wherever you happen to be, you have a reasonable expectation that you can do creative work with the right tools and not have to spend weeks and weeks getting set up in an on-prem infrastructure. So the cloud's always going to be there, but the cloud by itself, until all the applications are high performance object native, which probably is silly, but the cloud itself works for parts of it, and the on-prem workflow is for the rest of it. So that a hybrid cloud strategy, paying real attention to your data management fundamentals and not moving data unless you have to, that's the way that things are going to go, rather than all cloud or all on-prem.
How do you see the adoption of object-based storage, and what are the challenges preventing media companies increasing demand for this? How are you helping to counter these challenges?
Working natively in an object store, whether on-prem or a service that you get from the public hyperscalers, is going to have to wait until the applications for creation, management, and distribution of media assets, once those applications become object native, we'll be able to take advantage of the very real advantages of object store, which is extensible metadata and the ability to have different file types associated with that object. And this kind of workflow hasn't really been explored to date because we're so used to, the media going on one lane and the closed captioning files going on the other lane and the audio stems going on the third lane and any kind of localization or other ephemeral files that travel with that project having to be tracked separately rather than all bound up in an object bundle and tagged appropriately. That's one of the things that our Data IQ product does, for instance, is in order to harmonize metadata between a POSIX-based file system and the extensible metadata of an object store, and being able to move back and forth and keep your metadata straight is something that we see most facilities having to pay a lot of attention to get right. Our software products encourage you to get that right because working in a hybrid cloud environment where you take advantage of the power of object as well as the single stream high throughput nature of an on-prem file-based solution, that's the hybrid workflow that most facilities are adopting today. And then of course, when you get all flash object store and object native applications, then the future may or may not look very different, but not all applications are going to upgrade at the same time.
Yeah, I think the cloud is really driving that adoption of object-based storage. Getting those archives into the cloud will mean, using one of these AWS Snowball devices, and that can help you get your content directly into S3. But we're finding customers also wanting to edit directly from S3, similar to they might have done with block-based storage. And that can have certain challenges because an S3 doesn't really have a file system. You need all of those other things like, file locking and permissions to really use it with the editorial tools. And that's why we developed the seamless proxy workflow to handle that. So to allow you to have direct streaming of content from object storage, but a fallback to block-based storage for things that need sort of lower latency access. And that, I think, is really important for customers. They need to be able to use that type of technology, but they also need to be able to have that flexible workflow. And that's where, the cost benefits come in. We see really significantly reduced storage infrastructure costs, but also things like if you're going to run a workstation in the cloud, those could be more modestly spec'd if you're doing a proxy-based workflow.
AI is certainly an interesting topic in storage. How do you see its role in optimizing storage systems?
Well, I think it's really, we've seen it really show its value, maybe a little bit more on the back end, as far as the kind of engineering development, in that for customers who are on our smart support system, their storage clusters are connecting to our central servers in California, where we are able to kind of collect all of their log data and all of their usage data in a very anonymized, private way. But in order to really get a large data set across a large number of customers, where we can really get some kind of valuable analytical insights into how our platforms are operating in production, right? And that allows us to kind of further optimize, our different software modules and, software services to provide a better product to our customers. So that, I think that's like, one of the kind of really immediate, wins that we've seen. When it comes to actually the end users, and AI in the software stack, at a customer site, I think you're starting to see things like, data placement, as you have even for an object storage platform like ours, where you start to have capabilities like a flash-based cluster that's combined with a larger capacity disk-based cluster. And AI can really kind of generate some insights onto data usage and of different assets and where to properly place them. But I think there's no question that AI is going to be, continue to be, developed and further really, kind of rolled out as a way to kind of optimize and make storage more intelligent.
The most wonderful thing about AI is that there aren't enough hours in the day to hire an entry-level or an intern person to watch and listen to your content in order to figure out what you've got. Oftentimes, the metadata is simply air date, show title, and run length. Whereas if you could use AI to chew through your content and figure out what you've got, then you can monetize that content more effectively and start to do things like automated Barker channels and other time-saving and efficient measures that indicate a familiarity with the content beyond simply a blind streaming story, if you will.
AI can really help storage in terms of like analyzing file access and determine what can be moved into different archive tiers. However, we kind of believe that this intelligence becomes more powerful when you view your media not just as files on a file system, but assets are part of a production. And as I mentioned earlier, we have this flow asset manager that sits on top of our storage, and that helps us to have a better intelligence about not just what the files are, but where they are in the project life cycle. And we think that's really important. I think it can be very tempting to throw around that word AI and see it as some sort of differentiator. However, what we found is it's more important to find use cases where AI really provides value. So we've seen a lot of our customers using speech to text or object detection so that they can remove manual tagging work. So it's really about not just saying, oh, it's an interesting word and we can do random things, but find something that's actually going to add value to the production chain.
Can you tell us what's coming next in content storage technology and workflows? And what is your company planning for?
We've put a lot of development effort recently into security in rolling out our S3 object lock, are kind of going through the rigorous certification programs for different kind of governmental security audit, like Phillips and common criteria. So building on that secure kind of hardened software stack that comes out of offering a, let's say, a real ransomware protection solution, we're really starting to move into kind of the container sphere, right? So we're working very closely with VMware to roll out our containerized version of our Hyperstore platform, so that VMware admins can configure and provide object storage directly within a vSphere interface. What this means is that facilities and customers can really start to kind of automate and the provisioning of storage in a way that they haven't been able to before, in a way that's really kind of dovetails with the move towards hyper-converged infrastructure. Now, it's not that you're going to necessarily store petabytes, in containerized storage services, but it really starts to provide real capabilities for kind of automating storage provisioning in edge cases. Let's say like an OB van, goes onto a remote production, they can, utilize kind of scripted infrastructure as code to spin up storage resources, which are able to secure and capture valuable recordings as they happen out in the field, and then automatically tier them back to a central object storage cluster for long-term preservation. That's just one example of some of the coming advantages of really the movement towards containerization of our storage software.
Now that we have things like NVMe over Fabric providing a distributed mesh for access to storage, or whether we have Spine and Leaf providing a mesh of access techniques so that you can use software-defined networking to scale your storage footprint in a more elegant way. The real thing is extended metadata, the ability of data migration tools to know what have I got, where is it located, how much is it costing me to keep it on that tier, and what am I going to do with those assets? And the ability to tie it all together with an API-driven workflow orchestration layer so that you really can start to have a very flexible, redeployable storage footprint in order to serve your content creation needs.
So EditShare really continues to drive a roadmap towards simplifying storytelling. And I think this last year, actually, storytelling has become more complex, particularly for traditional media players. But I don't think the creativity has stopped. And I think we've seen some really new, exciting workflows open up throughout this last year. But these workflows are still a bit complex and requiring media to move around. And so we're going to be investing in ways in which we can help people really edit from wherever they need to be accessing that content. I think also that combination of storage and asset management tools are going to help reduce that friction that you might have in creating content around the world. But we also don't believe that one company has that monopoly on innovation. And so we expect over the next year to be continuing to double down on our partnerships to offer customers the choice and flexibility they need for a modern video production workflow.
I'd like to thank all three of you for joining us today. That was a really interesting conversation. Thank you.